I'm Stephen Wervis, and I'm going to talk to you about SDE and why it matters, and then how we can use it in business acquisitions. So SDE is really about finding out how much money does a business really make. A business might have a top line revenue uh, of a few million, but they may not actually make money after you subtract expenses. But then there's also different kinds of expenses, and that gets into what SDE is all about. So SDE stands for seller discretionary earnings, and so therein lies the key. It's not discretionary if you have to buy it. So cost of goods sold, if you are buying a product for $10, reselling it for 20, you might be able to find a better deal on it. But once you've kind of optimized that part of it, you're not going to be able to get the cost of goods sold down any further. So it's not discretionary. It's a cost, and a new buyer of the business coming in would also have that cost. Again, they might be able to optimize, but as far as you know, that cost is fixed, and hopefully that cost is a predictable cost that will move forwards. So it's a necessary revenue. That could also include costs of employees. Again, optimization, but it's not an optional cost as far as is known. The optional expenses, though, they can be vary quite a bit, and that's where the SDE part comes in. So some optional expenses might include the salary of the owner, which would then be an add back. So you add back the salary of the owner onto the SDE, so that's part of your discretionary earnings, because you could choose to pay yourself little, nothing, a lot, and so that's discretionary. This insurance often is also included, and insurance could be on a vehicle or on transportation. Maybe the owner takes vacations to a conference every year. You could choose not to take the conference unless you deem that that conference was necessary for the operation of the business. So there could be legit expenses that kind of seem discretionary. So that'd be something to dig into deeper and make sure that it's truly a personal item and not essential to the business. Often it's meals, and a lot more could be put in that bucket depending upon the seller and how they have been treating the tax system. So that's something to watch out with, and also continue to verify that they are indeed personal expenses and provable and not actually a business critical expense, because you don't want to think you have discretionary earnings that are not discretionary in reality. So again, back to the key here is uh, what can the business return back to the owner after the business is done with the expenses needed to run it. Some exclusions could be a one-time expense. They're added back. An example of that, I was looking at a deal with a truck garage, and they had expanded. They basically created a second lane. They had a long lane for their bay that could fit a couple of trucks, so they added a second lane in parallel. So that's a great expansion of the business, gave them more room, could do more operation there. But that was a significant expense, and that was an add back because they did that one time, and it actually made the business better and more profitable. But it's not going to be an ongoing cost to do that, adding bays on, unless you're choosing to add those bays on. So that's an add back. Uh, Another other aspect here is you might not see on the numbers is capital expenditures, and you might have a truck that is good for 10 years, 5 years, 15 years. You might have other equipment, and it may not show up on the numbers you're looking at if you're just seeing those past 3 years. So it's important to know what equipment is there and used in the business and necessary for the business, and then know what the service life of that equipment is, how much life is potentially left in that equipment, and what it's going to take to replace it. And then you would, as the buyer, be wanting to take that and give a uh, percentage amount each year of those expenses to take those out. So the long-standing assumption is always that SD includes an owner and operator salary, but only one. And so if there's multiple owners, or sometimes I find that a lot of these businesses have the owner's wife is also working, maybe do bookkeeping or invoicing, something like that. That's not part of the SDE. The assumption is SDE is one operator, and so if you need another person there, they can't be adding back uh, money for what they're paying a family member to do some other task. That would have to be assumed that that is someone you're going to have to hire for, and so then it's not SDE. So now that you have SDE, you have a solid number about what the business is actually able to give the owner, after you subtract expenses, long-term capex. Uh, you can take that, and when you're analyzing the deal, you need to subtract the salary you intend to pull for expenses that may be the same or different than what the previous owner did. But what's important is you need to account for this, because you need this to work for you if you're doing this as the owner and operator. So whatever is left over, then you have the remaining funds, and those can cover your debt servicing. And if there's a bad time in the business, maybe life just happens and business takes a turn for worse. Maybe it's a seasonal business and it can have slow times, busy times. Maybe the transition is hard and you lose some employees and now you can't do as much business. So a lot of things could happen. So you want to have just a little bit of cushion there to cover you. That comes to what debt service coverage ratio is about. That's saying that you have more available for the debt coverage than you need, or measuring what is there anyways. So a debt service coverage ratio of 1 would mean you have exactly what you need for payments. So like if you had a house payment that was $1,000 a month and you drew whatever your salary and you had your personal expenses, then what was left over was 1,000 a month. Your debt service cover ratio on your house would be 1. Which makes it really tight, and like I just said, you want it to be a little higher just to give you that flux. And so the formula there is the money available to pay the debt divided by the debt service payments, and so whatever unit of time. So if you're looking at monthly debt service payments, then what's the SDE available for debt service payments for a month uh, versus a month. So as long as you're apples to apples, that time range doesn't matter. Uh, Banks typically look for that 1.5 or higher to make it a safe deal, and that just means that you have some uh, flux there, like we were talking about. There may be cases where you might know what you're doing, and you might know this business is stable, and you might be able to go lower. And then also, too, there is a case where maybe you want to be a little higher just for your own comfort. So that's SDE and why it's important, and how you can go ahead and calculate it, and then once you calculate it, how you can use it. So this, of course, is something during the negotiation process you're going to have discussions with the owner, and if there's a broker involved, trying to establish what the SDE is and come to an agreement on it in basing your price, or just making your price based off of what it is, and then through due diligence, you may further look into it and verify that this the SDE available that they said is actually available. So you'd verify that when you get into due diligence.